talk about getting our records in our database sorted. And first thing we're going to do is make a couple changes to our object class so that we can do that. And the next thing we're going to do is make some changes to the database class so that it registers that things are being sorted. Okay? You want to put that away? So in the comic book class, what we're going to need to do is we're going to make this so that it's comparable. Okay, so basically what we want to think about is like if you just had an array of like integers, right, and you wanted to do some kind of sort, then you would write some code that is like what we've done before we got into this, which would be something like sorry about that. Okay, so like when we talked about sorting, that's supposed to be an F. We talked about doing like some kind of for loop, and then inside of there some kind of for loop, right? And then inside of here we're doing some kind of comparison. Now some of these have like different methodologies of doing this, but we're doing some kind of if the array at I is less than the array at I plus 1, for example, right? So we said then we're going to swap if that happens. We talked about that sort of idea, right? It's not, if these are numbers, then that's fine. But if they're not numbers, if they're objects like what we're talking about now, then we have to have some way of saying, how do I know that this object is less than that object? Does this make sense? Okay. And so what we generally do for an object is we have some kind of method that's called compare to. All right. And so that we understand what I'm talking about here, what we do then is we have some kind of method like this. Okay, so this fills in this blank spot that you have here. Okay, and what's going on here is what we're saying is the way that we're going to compare these objects is we're going to compare whatever object it is that you are referencing here. Okay, so this object's title is going to be compared to another object's title. All right, so this whole thing is what you want to be copying right now, and then you want to be kind of listening to the description of what's going on. So who can tell me what type of object title is? It's a string, right? It's a string, right? So like we'd expect for a comic book, we'd expect Captain America or Superman or something like that. Okay? So what we're really doing here is we're saying take the string that I called title and compare it to the other book that you're sending me here. Compare it to that other book's title. And then we got to figure out, well, what does compare to do in that case? Well, we know that it returns an int here, okay, because we're returning an int for this, so this whole thing must be an int. All right. So what compare to does is it takes a look at these strings. Okay, so let's say that we have the title of this. Sorry about that. Let's say that the title of this, in other words, this dot title equals Captain America. Okay, and then let's say that we have some other book that we're going to compare it to. So other dot title equals Captain Caveman. All right. So what compare to does from a strings perspective is it takes a look at these letters, and it thinks about them in terms of their ASCII code value. All right. Now, when I say ASCII code, do you guys all understand what it is I'm talking about?
ASCII.
The ASCII code, yeah. So the ASCII code, remember, is the numeric value that is assigned to each of those characters in the computer. So there's like a table of values, right? Capital A is like 97, lowercase a is bigger than that or smaller than that. I don't know, whatever. I don't think it matters what the actual values are. What matters is that you understand that, like, when you type an A on the keyboard, it's actually a number that's sent to the processor, and it understands that it's getting a character from the keyboard. And when it processes a value, it processes it as a number, really. Yep.
Is it wrong for ASCII? Is it wrong to remember it by like ASCII, and then I just think like number ASCII?
I think however you make sense of it for yourself is great. Okay? Yeah, that's fine. Okay? So what compare to does in this case then is it says basically like take a look at the number here and take a look at the number here and then subtract those values. Okay? So if we did that for this, C minus C is going to be 0. Does that make sense? A minus A is going to be 0. P minus P is going to be 0. T minus T is going to be 0. A minus A is going to be 0. I minus I is going to be 0. N minus N is going to be 0. Space minus space is going to be 0. A minus C is going to be what? A positive or a negative value? A negative value, right? A minus C you would expect to be a negative value. If lowercase a is 97, then that means lowercase c would be 99, and so a minus c would be negative 2. Does that make sense? Okay. M minus a, all the rest of these, they don't really matter anymore. Okay. All we're looking for is basically the first value that's different and what value it gives us. Okay, so we're not going into like the really technical details of what compare to does, but what we are doing is saying as soon as we have a difference in the strings, take the either positive or negative value that it comes from that difference. Does that make sense? And so I can't tell you that compare to right here is going to return negative 2, but I can tell you that if it's comparing Captain America to Captain Caveman, that it will return a negative value. Does that make sense? Anybody confused about that? All right. So that's what we want to do inside of our comic book. Okay? You could decide differently. Okay? So for example, you could decide in here that you don't like to compare it by the string. Okay? So this is if I want the titles to be in order. Okay? I could decide, in other words, that I don't want to do that. Instead, what I want to do is make sure that all the issue numbers are in order. Okay? And if that's the case, then what I'm going to do is go return this dot issue. Okay? And I'm not going to do dot compare to for that, because issue is what type? Int. And do ints have methods that I can use on them? No. They're just primitive values, okay? So what I would do instead for that is I would just subtract the other book dot issue. All right? So basically, this dot title dot compare to other book dot title, you can think about it like subtracting the strings. Does that make sense to you? Right? Because that's basically what we did up here. C minus C is 0, A minus A is 0, all the way down to A minus C. Finally, we got something that was different. We said this is going to be a negative. Okay? This dot issue minus other book dot issue. If issue, sorry. Hopefully this makes sense to you. If this dot issue is 5, and we're subtracting the other book's issue, which is 3, then this is going to give me what? 2, okay? Or in other words, a positive number. What we really care about is whether it's a negative or a positive. Does that make sense? Are you guys following us so far? Okay.
Why are we doing the negative?
Okay, so let's bring it back to the point of this is to get these things to be sortable. Does that make sense? What we talked about a second ago was if you have, you know, a sort method, you have some for loop, and then you have another for loop, right? And in there you're making a comparison, right? Array at I, sorry about that, is less than array at I plus 1. And what we said was, how do I know if this object here is less than this object there? If they're numbers, nice, it's easy. If they're objects, we need a compare to method in order to make that work. You guys understand this? Okay? So, let's go back to here. Oh, that's where those notes were. Okay? So that's really all you need to do in your object class. For me, it's comic book. Is you have to decide what am I going to sort these things by? Okay. So if you have like a name, that's a nice thing to sort by. If you have a size, that's a nice thing to sort by, right? If it's an int or a double, then you can just subtract the two values. If it's a string, you usually will use the compare to method in the string class. Does that make sense so far? All right. Then you want to go over to your database and you want to add in here, add in right here, sort b.addActionListener this. You guys following that? Right? So this is going to be, make that thinner here. Right? Sort b.addActionListener. That should be straightforward for you. Down here, we're going to put in the else if e.getSource equals sort b. This should be like automatic for you at this point. I mean, we've done this 6 times, right? Right? So if that happens, then we want to go to the sort method. Right? And the sort method, you can see I've started up here. All I've shown you now is at the end of the sort method, we want to say comiclist.setListData. For me, it's books. That's my array. Right? We want to show the changes. That basically just show changes. That's basically what that does, right? Inside of here, and this is how, when you guys are going to make some decisions, the 3 sorts that you know for sure, okay, not that you know them by heart, but you know where to find them in your book, okay, and you might have notes on them, and if not, you could look them up and find it very quickly. What's one of the sorts that we know? Selection sort is one. I heard another one which was bubble. And then the other one was insertion sort. Okay? We also looked at, and it would be tough for you guys, I think, to implement at this point, but we also looked at the quicksort algorithm. Okay? We looked at a couple other ones, but those are the 4 that we really, quote unquote, studied. Okay? Okay. So all of those except for quicksort have this sort of, for some loop instructions here, for some other loop instructions here, we make a comparison. And this is the thing that I want to kind of make sure you understand. Okay? So in here we're making some kind of comparison to say if, and for me what it's going to be is if I want these things to be in like ascending order, right? Then I want to know if I should swap the thing that's I'm currently looking at. Does that make sense? So it would be for me it would be something like books at some value. Okay, so I'm going to say element dot compare to. That's the method that we just wrote on the page on the flip side of this. And I'm going to compare it to books at element plus 1. Okay? And what I want to know is whether this value is going to be a negative value or a positive value. Does that make sense? Okay? And if I'm trying to put them in order, in ascending order, then I'm going to say this guy, if I want to know if this guy is bigger than this guy. Does that make sense? In other words, is the one that I'm looking at bigger than the one that's after it? You guys following that? And the way I test that is just to see if the compare to method returns a value that is bigger than 0. Okay? And if it is, that'll tell me that I want to swap. Or do some other thing like set smallest, or do, you know what I mean? Like whichever sort you deal with is what's going to tell you what goes in here. You know, you're going to be replacing some code. So these are the two big things. Have a compare to method. You decide how you're comparing one object to another. Is it by the string value? Is it by a number value? Whatever it is, you have to make that decision. Does that decision make sense to you? Okay? And then the next thing is decide what type of sort you're going to do. Is it going to be bubble sort, selection sort, insertion sort? Here's how you compare one element to the other. You guys getting this? Okay? So just to show you kind of what you're expected to have at the end of this. Oh, so I changed this so that's going to return it sorted by issue number. I'll go back and show you what it does in the other case here. So hopefully you're already at a point where you can open a file. Okay, so if I sort these now, you can see that it's issue 1, issue 1, issue 3. Okay, just happens to be that it's in sequential order that way as well. If I go back here and I change the way that my compare to method works, okay, did I close that? Yeah. Okay, so these are in unsorted order now, right? Now, it looks the same, but I'm sorting them, hopefully you understand because of what I did here. I'm sorting them by their title rather than sorting them by their issue number. Okay, so sort those, goes into that order. Captain America comes before Criminal, which comes before Thor. Is this making sense? Yeah.
The different sources makes a difference on how much time it takes to sort it?
You're saying like whether we select bubble sort or selection sort or insertion sort? Yeah, I mean some are better for other, certain purposes. It really doesn't matter to me which one you pick, and for this small data set, it really doesn't matter at all, right? I mean, it's going to go very fast. Okay. Okay, so do you guys have questions that I didn't answer?